Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering exercises on how to improve your aim and get you really comfortable, so whenever you feel really nervous or whenever you're feeling not confident, that you're building a strong foundation utilizing the test range on Apex Legends. What we're going to customize the range and we're going to set everyone to always mythic. The reason why is we want our target dummies to stay alive as long as possible. Now we're also going to set them to either stay in place or strafe constant. The other settings are not bad, but for today's exercises, I want to keep a level of consistency. We're also not going to have them crouch. When they're crouching, sometimes the dummies don't necessarily move as fast, and we want to be able to see them at all ranges, and you'll see what I mean when we put them in different locations, because they have dynamic spawning. So we're going to make sure that they're always running, and that they always at least are in a standing position. We'll also work on some pressure based on them shooting, and we'll explain that as well in a few exercises. We're going to focus primarily on the distances. We're going to give you different distances and where to stand in the test range to improve your aim. Now, if any problem occurs with the dummies, you can spawn new dummies or refresh the dummies in place. Spawning new dummies usually solves the problem if they're not working, and I have had some issues where that does occur. If it does occur, sometimes you'll need to leave the test range and come back in. Now, let's segue to the first exercise. In the first exercise, it's always fun to run two of a close range weapon. Right now I have a 30-30 because we want to use that in a later example, but let's go and grab ourselves, let's say, a Volt SMG. What we're going to do is we're going to deck out the Volt SMG with everything that we prefer, and we're going to use this as our close range gauntlet. What we're going to do is we're going to pop in our favorite song, and we're going to work on trying to one-mag these bots as best as possible. Remember, what we're learning here is just getting close right up in their face and that uncomfortable pressure that you normally feel, especially whenever a bot switches their strafe. So the reason I say your favorite song is this will help you vibe out, help you build a strong foundation, and then work your way over to the buildings. What you'll do is you'll start to just chase wherever they spawn during this gauntlet. This is a lot of fun to do, and sometimes when they spawn, maybe they'll spawn out in the open, but if you run away just a little bit, they'll respawn and move to a different spot. So just keep running around the map, and as soon as they appear, just start to track them. What you can incorporate is some cover every time you reload that you need to switch. Of course, if you don't want to switch over to your other weapon, to help with your weapon switches, to keep things going, then switch that as well. You're not going to one-mag them every time, but the goal is to always have at least a one-mag and build a level of comfort. Even for me, it's never perfect, and sometimes it's good to come in here to build that level of comfort that you're trying to succeed, whether you're doing ranked or pubs for the day. Even just one go of this will help you remind that you don't necessarily need to control the recoil as much as you think. Your goal should be focused on just hitting the target within their strafe. And their strafe isn't even that dramatic, which is why we have it at a constant speed. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to segue to our next distance here, and what I recommend is always making sure you know where the supply bins are located. So one of them is located here, which is going to be helpful after you finish your gauntlet if you want to go to exercise number 2. Now for exercise number 2, what we're going to do is we're going to grab a 30-30 and our favorite AR. So let's go and grab a 30-30, and we're going to also load out with an R301. We're going to deck it out, we're going to put a mid-range to long-range sight, we're going to put everything that we know and love on it. I'm going to switch this because I accidentally put a 1x2 on it. And there we go. That's perfect. Now what we're going to stand is actually going to be here, and we're going to change the setting for these to move around mid-range. Now they should spawn dynamically within the 50-meter range, which is what it highlights that they spawn here, 25 to 50. And then you could just look for the targets and then start blasting away. Some of them will spawn in buildings, will help you give this healthy bit of burst damage, and some of them will spawn a little more dynamically on the roof. Almost couldn't say dynamically there. Now, what we're going to do is if they spawn underneath you, that's not a bad thing, because at least you'll give you some of the pressure that you need to look down an opponent if you have ideal height. But you can use a head glitch here and get used to utilizing good positioning if you need to. Now, remember during these exercises, while you do stand in the open and you are getting a good beam, not to ignore this and to separate what you're training. Now, the reason I mention this is that if you just keep putting yourself out in the open, what you're going to do when you're in-game is that you might accidentally put yourself out in the open. And I don't want you necessarily to build that bad habit. So just be aware of what you're trying to train. In this exercise, we're just simply trying to train, initially, our control at shooting individuals that are within a mid-range area, which can definitely help. Now, if they all cluster up and you don't want them to be here, remember, again, what you can do is spawn new dummies. If you spawn new dummies, they'll spawn in different locations for you, and if you look at a different area, they'll start to spawn in different areas as well. So let's segue to the next exercise. As we run over to this next spot, I initially wanted to move this to a new spot, but I couldn't get the target dummies to move where I wanted to. So where that was located was actually over on the little island, so I decided to move it over to this spot instead. Now if you stand right here, this is a really good spot also to avoid this, and if you switch this to far, they'll all spawn mostly in front of you. So it's going to spawn new dummies, and there we go. Now we don't necessarily want them to move anymore. In this exercise, our goal is to learn how to control recoil using a specific AR or SMG. The plus side is there's also a little bin right here, which is also really nice. So I made sure when you have these exercises, you have also a bin nearby, so you can also change out your loadout. And luckily at the test range, they put quite a few of them in here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set these guys to stay in place. They're going to respawn, and now the goal is to control recoil at this distance. This is a pretty healthy distance when engaging with a R301, and if you're expecting to land as many bullets as possible. Now the reason we're having them in stand is I'm going to show you an example. Most pros don't necessarily run out in the open and start spraying like this. This is very unrealistic if you see a pro just standing out in the open and just spraying without any cover. Most of the time is that they'll hug the cover and they'll move dynamically in between it, and then strafe left and right. So you can practice that. So the reason why we're moving up here is that this gives you a nice spawn point for all the dummies to spawn, but also helps you practice that recoil. Now when practicing the recoil at this distance is understand how a loadout recoil works. So in this example, for the R301, it pulls down and then it pulls heavy to the right. So to counteract that, we're going to pull down and then to the left. Now the recoil pattern at the very end kind of does this weird swooping motion. If you look here, it kind of does this weird pattern and loop-de-loops around. At the very end, all you got to do is, well, move left and move right. Just a little bit, just a little bit. It's not as much as you think. I think that's the biggest thing that everyone gets hung up on recoil. And if a target dummy spawns in a really uncomfortable position, just simply spawn them a new spot. Do this for a couple times a day and it'll help you remind you. Now here's a little extra tip on this exercise as well, is that if you're standing on the mountain here, there's a lot of target dummies that are in a lot more locations than you even realize. So there's a target dummy located there. The reason why I didn't have you spawning the target dummies when you're all the way up on the roof is we want them to spawn in a more organic spot in front of us without any obstruction. That's the best spot that I can think of just in the test range. If you spawn up here, sometimes they may spawn in really weird spots. But at least if you're all the way up there, you can look at these right here and hit those targets when you're on the mountain, or use the mountain when you're on the opposite side over there. Just in case you want to have something a little different and you want some consistency based on your targets and you don't want to have to deal with the spawns per se. So just a little tip there. Now for this next exercise, we're going to focus on targets that are very, very far away. Well, you'll notice here what we're going to change is actually we're going to switch it over to where they actually start moving again. Because we're not necessarily focused on the recoil pattern from a distance anymore. What we're really focused on is that bullet velocity and how you lead. Especially when you're using a scout, a 30-30, or a sniper, and how it feels. Now, the biggest tip that I can provide is that you don't have to lead as much as you think. But also the real true way to improve at this distance and landing your shots is by missing. The more that you miss, the more that you're going to start to correct in your brain and tells you, hey, I need to lead a little bit more, or I'm leading too much, or I need to not account for the bullet drop as much here. What can be helpful is utilizing Vantage here to help you practice, because there is a little bit of a bullet drop indicator that tells you, and I always forget that with Vantage because I never really pay much attention to it, but it can be there to help you. Especially whenever you're just aim training and practicing. Because then if you switch to a different legend, then you'll understand, hey, I didn't actually need to lead as much as I thought. And you'll start to memorize that distance and what it looks like on your indicator. And of course, if you miss, it's perfectly fine. The beauty of this is that you have to miss to improve. Do it in the test range, because if you do it in the test range, then you'll start to improve dramatically when you're in a real world scenario, because you'll be a lot more calm because at least you're more used to this. So practice this distance. Even if you were to say remove this sight and practice this distance, you'll realize how little you actually have to lead and how little bullet drop there can be. Now, of course, there's not really a loadout thing up here, so I do recommend making sure you get your guns right here, which is why, well, it's located right over there, so it's not too far, but it's a little further distance compared. Now, the reason I didn't do it all the way up here, there is a loadout thing right there, and there's also a Nessie, which you can do, but you'll be looking down a little bit more on the targets than normal. But it is an option if you would like to be over there as well. Now, what you can do as well is spawn these at any distance. Any distance, I kind of recommend being at the center of the map again. The reason why is because you're actually going to be switching between your loadouts consistently, and let's go and spawn new dummies while we're at it, is that you'll be sometimes running up close and personal, blasting somebody, and then sometimes you'll need to shoot some targets at further range. Now, what you'll notice is sometimes the target dummies do break. Now, whenever they do, you'll just need to spawn new ones or just eliminate the ones that are standing still. I don't really know what the cause of this is. I'm sure it'll be updated in a future patch, but trust me, we've all dealt with it. And I've dealt with it even when I've been doing some coaching and helping others. I don't really know the cause of it. But if you restart your game and spawn new dummies and you move around the map, usually it'll help them refresh and come back on. Another big tip that can help whenever you're running into the issue with the dummies is just spawn them off and then spawn them back in. Now, what I recommend as well is whenever you're trying to get used to some pressure situations, is let's go ahead and change our loadout, is to run around and get used to target dummies blasting at you. Being at the center of the map can be very, very helpful. So let's go to loadout with the Prowler, and we'll keep the R301 for some of our mid-range engagements if we want to use that for close range, just to get used to it. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to have the target dummies blast at us. We're going to set them to hard. I honestly, the only real settings I recommend are either hard or the one where they go full combat. The problem when they go full combat is that their movement and strafe starts to feel a little unrealistic from how a player actually moves. As you keep moving around, you'll get used to this pressure. And if you would like to really simulate the pressure, just stand right out in the open over here. I know normally you wouldn't do this, but for exercise sake, so you're getting used to target dummies shooting you at different locations. Let's go ahead and reset all of them. Let's definitely want them all a little closer, if that's ideal. Is that you want to make sure that you're practicing where you feel the most pressure and they're putting that onto you. Now, what we're going to do is that when we put them in full combat, they'll ignore any movement settings that you've set for them. And when you do that, that's whenever I mentioned that the movement can start to feel a little weird. But even though the movement's a little weird, there's still something to learn from it, right? Notice how once I moved around, they started to do stuff. But look how sometimes they're just they're a little interesting, a little bit interesting. But their movement doesn't feel as organic. But doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And most of the time, they just have peacekeepers. But this can be good for a close-range gauntlet, just feeling some of the pressure. But I do recommend still that they strafe in front of you and that they do something. They're going to melee you, they're going to start to do some stuff, and it can simulate some of that pressure if you happen to panic a lot. It's not perfect, and they do fly up and have some weird movement, I will say. Some of them have some really, really interesting rolls. But for consistency's sake, I do recommend at least just setting it to hard, because at least they're going to land some shots on you, and then running around and then trying to blast as many as possible. So these were some exercises really covering every single distance. If you do this probably about, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes a day, you don't have to go through everything. I really am confident you'll start to really improve and really find your own. So don't take these exercises for granted. I know they seem a little simplistic, but I promise you so many pros, even myself, come in the range. And I think even some of you have hopped in when I've accidentally had open invite, hopped in, and I'm literally just running around blasting these bots. I think they're a pretty healthy addition to the game. There's a few things I would prefer that they were able to do, such as taking jump pad, maybe taking zips up, but nonetheless, it gives you a pretty solid pacing on what you need to do to improve. So hopefully this video is helpful for you. I've been giving these exercises as well to others. I know some of them might seem a bit too simple, but hopefully giving you some context and where to stand in the range can really help you improve. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.